All right, so this is our last Torah study today, May 22nd, until the Wednesday after Labor Day, just on a summer break. And so, Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam shekidshanu b'mitzvotav v'tzivanu la'asok b'divrei Torah. Um, the portion today is Bahar. We've spoken about aspects of Bahar. It's a short Torah portion that begins on page 738, just essentially just chapter 25 with two sentences from chapter 26. And it's all about the sabbatical year. So we've talked about that. We've talked about an agrarian economy, aspects like that. So instead, I want to talk about something else from the Torah today. So we'll go not instead of doing Parshat Hashavua, the weekly Torah portion, I wanted instead to talk about an aspect of Torah related to today's date on the Jewish calendar. Today is known as Pesach Sheni, second Passover. It's the 14th of ER today, and so that relates to what we learn in the portion Baha'alotecha. So turn to page 819 in the Eitz Chaim, or chapter 9 of the book of Numbers, whatever edition of Chumash you have. So again, in Eitz Chaim, it's page 819. And I'm going to share my screen in a moment with a Devar Torah that came out this morning in honor of Pesach Sheni from Rabbi Avi Strasberg, who is the rabbi for the Hadar Institute based here in D.C. The Hadar Institute is a non-denominational study institution, kind of like Hartman is in Israel. Hadar is based in New York, and they've expanded to a couple of other metropolitan areas in America, in which they provide classes for intensive adult education classes that are essentially Torah or Talmud based. Not much Jewish thought based or other topics like that, but more rabbinic literature based. They're very good classes, and Hadar offers classes through the Washington Board of Rabbis. In fact, the president of Hadar came yesterday to Addis, Israel, for a Washington Board of Rabbis study day. His name is Shai Held, and he just came out with a book called Judaism. It's on my shelf. Yeah, it's called Judaism is About Love. So Shai Held. It's a very good book. He taught from it, and anyway, so that's Hadar. So Pesach Sheni, second Passover. So we know, in many ways, Passover is probably the most important of all the Jewish holidays. Certainly it's the oldest of all the Jewish holidays, not counting Shabbat, counting holiday as opposed to the weekly occurrence of Shabbat. Passover is the oldest of the holidays because the very first one happened in Egypt. The other holidays were commanded 3 months later when the people got to Mount Sinai. And it is the formative event in Jewish history, transforming the people of Israel into the nation of Israel. So the families of Israel became the nation of Israel as a result of Passover. So because of that, the importance of it, we read about in the book of Numbers the opportunity, the time when the people actually would be observing Passover in the desert. So it's been a year since they left Egypt. And we get to chapter 9 of the book of Numbers, and we find that it's now Passover. So let's read there, again, the start of chapter 9 on page 819 in the Eitz Chaim, chapter 9 of the book of Numbers. Vayedaber Adonai el Moshe v'midbar Sinai b'shana hashenit l'tzeitam me'eretz Mitzrayim b'chodesh harishon lemor. God spoke to Moses in the Sinai desert, Sinai wilderness, in the second year of them leaving the land of Egypt, in the first month, saying. So it's the anniversary of the Exodus from Egypt, right? So God speaks to Moses at that time. V'yasu b'nei Yisrael et ha'pasach b'moado. What did God say to Moses? The people of Israel should make Passover at its time. So it could be the beginning of the month so they have 15 days to get ready, 14 days to get ready. And that's what God is commanding Moses to do, that the people of Israel should make Passover. They're in the desert. Okay. Ba'ar ba'asar yom b'chodesh hazeh bein ha'arbayim ta'asu oto b'moado kechol chukotav uchechol mishpatav ta'asu oto. On the 14th day of this month, at twilight, you should make it at its time, according to its laws and ordinances. You should do it. I said laws and ordinances. It says all its rules and rights. Chok and mishpat are technical terms. A chok is a law that doesn't have a logical reason behind it, like keeping kosher is not a logical law. Do not steal is a logical law. So a mishpat is like do not steal. No, do not steal is an example of a mishpat. Keeping kosher, that is eating certain animals and not being allowed to eat certain animals, that's an example of a chok. So when it applies to Passover, it might be that the English translation here is more accurate. Anyway, all the laws and ordinances related to the holiday of Passover you should observe. Okay? That's what God says to Moses. He goes on 8:20, verse 4, Vayedaber Moshe el b'nei Yisrael lasot ha'pasach. So Moses spoke to the people of Israel and commanded them to do Passover. V'ya'asu et ha'pesach ba'rishon ba'arba'asar yom lachodesh bein ha'arbayim b'midbar Sinai kechol asher tziva Adonai et Moshe kein asu b'nei Yisrael. And they did Passover in the first month. It says in the first. So I think that means in the first month. On the 14th day of the month, at twilight, in the Sinai desert, they did it according to everything that God commanded Moses. So did the people of Israel do. Okay, so they fulfilled the commandment. So that's the first Passover. No details. How did the Seder go? How did they make matzah? How did they offer the sacrifices? No details like that. Just the generic. They did it. God commanded it. Moses commanded the people. The people did it. 6. Vayehi anashim asher hayu tameim lenefesh adam v'lo yachlu la'asot hapesach bayom hahu vayikrivu lifnei Moshe v'lifnei Aharon bayom hahu. So there were some men, I guess we can go with the biblical Hebrew and assume it's men, who were impure because of being in contact with the dead. Okay, impure by reason of a corpse. So they were impure from contact with the dead, and they were not able to make Passover on that day. Okay, so to do Passover means to offer the Passover sacrifice. Right? So that's a major element of it, and that becomes the major one of the at the time that the temple stood in Jerusalem, this was the probably the most popular of all the holidays because everybody participated in bringing a lamb, and not every single person bringing a lamb, but groups of people would come together with a lamb, and they would be in line to from the morning of the 14th of Nisan to offer the lamb and to have it slaughtered and prepared in time for Passover that would start at twilight leading into the night. So that was the major way to do Passover when the temple was standing, and then eating it over the Seder meal with the Haggadah that we're familiar with, right? So for us, having the shank bone is the only remnant that we have on the Seder plate of what occurred as a major celebration and ceremony on the 14th of Nisan. Okay, but you had to be pure to do it. So that's why we have the special Shabbases that lead up to Passover that remind us of that, including Shabbat Parah, which is the Shabbat at the end of the month of Adar, but not the one immediately preceding the month of Nisan. So it's like 3 weeks before Passover, you have Shabbat Parah, which is reminds us from chapter 19 of Numbers, the whole ritual for how to become pure when being in contact with the dead. So we know for sure, so that reminder then is there for the people of Israel to be sure that they are purified, and that they, if they come into contact with the dead before Passover, that they need to go through that rite of purification in order to participate in this ritual in the temple. Okay, so even though chapter 19 hasn't occurred yet because we're in chapter 9, we do know about the laws of purity and impurity from Leviticus. So the people have heard all those laws already, and these men were impure on the 14th of Nisan in the desert that year. So they approach Moses. The men were impure. They weren't able to offer the Passover sacrifice, and they approached. I don't think I finished translating verse 6. They approached Moses and Aaron on that day. Okay, so it's Pesach. So it's the 15th of Nisan. It's the next day. Everybody offered the Passover sacrifice. They come on the 15th, and they said, "Hey, we were impure." 7. Vayomru ha'anashim hahema elav anachnu tameim lenefesh adam lama nigara levilti hakriv et korban Adonai b'moado b'toch b'nei Yisrael. So those men said to him. Now it says in verse 6 that they approached Moses and Aaron. Here it says to him. Okay, so did they approach Moses and Aaron and only spoke to one of them? Or because the Hebrew, it should say aleihem. Vayomru ha'anashim hahema aleihem. So because it says Moses and Aaron, it should be the plural. They spoke to them, but it says spoke to him. I'm just pointing that out. That doesn't matter in the scheme of things of what I wanted to talk about, but just pointing out that this happens frequently throughout the Torah. Okay, so the people said to them, we are impure because we've come into contact with the dead. Why should we be debarred? That's how it's translated. Why should we be prevented from bringing the sacrifice to God at its time among the people of Israel. Right? We wanted to do it. We're impure. What can we do about it? How can we observe Passover? Why should we be excluded? 8, Vayomer Alehem Moshe, Imdu ve'eshme'a ma yetzaveh Adonai lachem. So Moses said to them, stand here and or wait until I hear what God will command you. So stay put. Hang on a second. I'm going to send a message to God. Right? Let me just text God and let's see what God has to say. Essentially putting it in 2024 language. And I don't mean to denigrate the whole process of communicating with God, but it's just interesting that here Moses is telling the people, just a second, let me communicate and let me hear what God has to say. So we get a little bit of a sense, but it's still unclear. How did that communication happen? Like, did only Moses hear from God? Did other people hear? Did something spiritual happen? Did something happen in their midst, but only Moses could hear it? That we don't know. Verse 9. Vayidaber Adonai el Moshe lemor. God spoke to Moses, saying, 10. Daber el bnei Yisrael lemor. Ish kihiyeh tamei lanefesh. O b'derech rechoka lachem. O ledorotechem v'asa Pesach ladonai. So, speak to the people of Israel, saying, anybody who has come into contact with the dead, or now adding another variable, right? Only the situation was men who were impure because of contact with the dead. Now God makes it a bigger thing. Anybody who comes into contact with the dead or is traveling in a far distance. That is, you're not in the next town for Passover, but you're out of the country. And out of the country in biblical and ancient times means a long distance. That would be impossible. Just the way that the traveling happens, it makes it impossible to be in town for Passover. So it's not just now, but forever. This is a law forever, ledorotechem, for all time. How to do Pesach. Who would want to offer Passover to God. 11, so then what do? So you're impure or you are far away when Passover comes. 11, B'chodesh hasheni, ba'arba'a asar yom, bein ha'arbaim, ya'asu oto, al matzot umirorim yochluhu. In the second month, on the 14th day of that month, at twilight, you should do it. That is, do Passover, make Passover. On matzah and maror, you should eat it, right? So just as you ate you were supposed to eat the Passover sacrifice, eat the lamb on matzah and with maror at Passover on the 14th in the evening, leading into the 15th of Nisan. If you're impure because of contact with the dead or you're far away, be sure to be in town and pure for ER the next month, the 14th of ER, and then you can do Pesach that day. And then, verse 12, Lo yashiru mimenu ad boker, ve'etzem lo yishberu vo, kechol chukata Pesach yasu oto. Don't leave it over till the morning, just like the original Passover in Nisan. You're not supposed to leave the meat over till the morning, and you're not supposed to break a bone in it. As according to all the laws of Passover, you should do it. So you do a 1-day Passover, not a 7-day Passover, and you do everything on that day like you would have done if you were able to back in Nisan. 13, V'ha'ish asher hu tahor uvederech lo haya V'chadal la'asot ha'Pesach, v'nichreta ha'nefesh hahi me'ameha, ki korban Adonai lo hikriv b'moado, chet'o yisa ha'ish hahu. And now adding on to this law, saying, and anybody who is pure and was not away in Nisan at the right time and didn't do Passover, his body will be cut off from the people. He'll be excommunicated, but also in the Torah, it can mean he'll be executed. God will execute him for not having done Pesach at the right time, because he didn't offer the sacrifice to God at the right time. His sin, he will have to bear the burden of his sin. And 14, V'chi yagur itchem ger, v'asa Pesach l'Adonai kechukat haPesach uchemishpato, ken yaseh chuka achat tihyeh lachem v'lager ule'ezrach haaretz. And if a stranger lives among you, that is someone who is not of your community, who is living among you, the Torah talks about this all the time, 36 times about the ger, that the ger, this person who is not of your family but is living amongst you, has to observe all the laws of the Israelite people themselves. So if there's a stranger among you, he should make Pesach to God according to the laws of Passover. There will be one law for Passover for the ger, for the resident alien, for the stranger, and for the citizen of the land, the Israelites themselves. Okay, so this is the law of second Passover. Now, what Rabbi Straussberg wanted to highlight from this is the idea of the chutzpah of the people to approach Moses and Aaron saying, hey, we were left out because we're impure. We want to be part of this. So I want to look at, I want to share my screen, and I want to look at her Devar Torah. And here it is. So the first 2 pages, just the first page and a half, just did everything that I just did in the first 23 minutes, setting the background. Pesach is the holiday in which there's a special emphasis placed on the obligation of everyone in this particular mitzvah. Okay, so we got the point. Everyone is obligated to observe Pesach and to offer the sacrifice. And yet, when it came to observe the very first Pesach since leaving Egypt, a group of people found themselves excluded. They had not done anything to warrant exclusion. All they had done was come into contact with someone who had died, right? So they didn't intentionally want to be apart from the community. They didn't intentionally say, hey, let's do something to avoid being part of Pesach. They had to come into contact with the dead, either inadvertently or, who knows, maybe they had funerals. They had to bury dead in their family. Perhaps they had lost someone, they had mourned someone, they had cared for someone in death, and as a result, they were in a state of impurity such that they couldn't bring the sacrifice necessary for Pesach. They were not to be included in this ritual that the Torah goes out of its way to tell us is incumbent upon everyone in all generations. Amazingly, this group of Israelites didn't sit quietly in the corner, allowing themselves to be sidelined from the story. Rather, they advocated for themselves. They said, why must we be debarred from presenting God's offering at its set time with the rest of the Israelites? The words at the end of their question are key. They want to be among Bnei Yisrael. They wanted to be a part of this pivotal collective experience. In response to their question, or perhaps their demand, Moses asks them to sit tight and seeks guidance from God. God responds by adding something new to the Torah, a Pesach Sheni. That would make it possible not only for this particular group to offer sacrifice, but future groups as well. They asked for themselves and they received an expansive accommodation that would benefit not only them, but future generations as well, right? So that's what I alluded to. The people themselves are asking for themselves. God decides to make an expansive commandment out of it. This is a story where it seems all's well that ends well. This group asked for what they needed and they got what they wanted. Pesach Sheni then is a holiday that highlights the necessity of inclusion and the importance of advocating for one's needs. Okay, so that's the first lesson that we might learn from that. I wonder, however, why did this group of Israelites need to advocate for themselves in the first place? Why didn't Moshe or even God anticipate their exclusion and already have a plan to ensure their participation? Right? In other words, right, if God is omniscient and God is all-knowing, why didn't God think of this and command this ahead of time? When commanding us in chapter 12 of Exodus, saying that this is the preparation for the Israelites in Egypt, and this is what it will be for all time, why didn't God say there, well, if, by the way, you happen to be impure because of contact with the dead, or you happen to be far away and you can't make it back to the temple in time for first Pesach, here's Pesach Sheni. So why wasn't it commanded back then in chapter 12 in Exodus? Why is it presented this way as if God hadn't thought of this? And it's only because this situation arose that caused God to say, oh, let's make this a more broader commandment. Granted, this was the first time the Israelites were celebrating Pesach since leaving Egypt, but still I wonder, couldn't God have anticipated that there would be individuals excluded from this very important communal ritual and already have a plan in place to include them? Or put another way, is it the responsibility of those left behind to advocate for their needs? Or is it the obligation of the community and its leaders to ensure the inclusion of all its members? So that's the key question. How do we ensure that our community is as inclusive as possible? Are we, the leaders of the communities, supposed to think about and anticipate all the needs? Like, is it the obligation of the leaders of the community to anticipate all needs? Or is it the obligation of the members of the community themselves to highlight needs and bring up needs to the leaders? Okay, so this is a question that people who've been advocating for inclusion, especially people advocating for people with disabilities to be included in the community, ask all the time. And it's still a matter of process. Though the Jewish community is more inclusive today than it was decades ago for people with disabilities, physical, emotional, intellectual disabilities, there are still problems there. And so it's an aspect of the discussion about inclusion is always this, as Rabbi Straussberg is presenting it here: should it be the responsibility of the leader to anticipate the needs and future needs of everyone in the community, or should it be the responsibility of the people themselves to advocate for themselves, right? And what if people can't advocate for themselves? Then what? So are leaders supposed to be proactive or reactive? So here's one example that Rabbi Straussberg brings from the Talmud about this. The Talmud debates this very question when it comes to ensuring that everybody has a proper place to sit. I just found in reading this ahead of time that there are a number of typos that hadn't been corrected. Rabbi, known also as Rabbi Yehuda Hanassi, and one of the greatest leaders in his generation. He's the one who edited the Mishnah, so around the year 200 or so, 1800 years ago, Rabbi once noticed that a certain place was too crowded and there weren't enough spaces for students to sit. So this is the story. Rabbi Yehuda Hanassi sees that there are too many students for the place where the lesson is supposed to occur. So what happens? Rabbi Chia said, once Rabbi went to a place and saw that the place was crowded for the students. He went out to the field and found a field full of bundles of grain. He cleared the whole entire field. So in other words, the story in the Talmud is Rabbi Chia, who is a rabbi of the same time of Rabbi Yehuda HaNasi, he actually edited what's called the Tosefta. So anything that didn't make it into the Mishnah is known as a Baraita, an external source. A collection of external sources, a Baraita, is called the Tosefta, and Rabbi Chia apparently is the editor of the Tosefta. So Rabbi Chia, Rabbi Yehuda HaNasi are colleagues. The story goes that Rabbah said that Chia saw what was happening, that there was a time that Rabbi Yehuda HaNasi was going to teach, saw that the place was too crowded. He went out into the field, saw the field was full of bundles, and he cleared the field. Now, this story is recorded in the tractate Shabbat, which means that the clearing of the field happened on Shabbat. Is that an appropriate work, kind of work to do on Shabbat? Why was Rabbi Yehuda HaNasi clearing a field on Shabbat? But more importantly, why was Rabbi Yehuda HaNasi doing the work to clear a space for students to study? What did Rabbi do? He went out and cleared a field of all its bundles to make sure there was adequate space for each student to sit. On the face of it, this is a story about moving chairs and the leader ensuring that everyone has a place to sit, right? And we talk about, there's been classes I've been in before about leadership, and that a leader shouldn't be afraid to do the dirty work to make the people comfortable. So here's Yehuda HaNasi, the editor of the Mishnah, the chief of the head of the Sanhedrin, getting down and doing the dirty work and not asking the custodian to do it. He's doing it himself. However, the story goes deeper. Despite the fact that moving all the bundles would require a significant amount of labor, which would ordinarily be prohibited on Shabbat, Rabbi still goes ahead and does it. Rabbi could have easily failed to notice that students were overcrowded, or he could have noticed and chosen not to intervene. However, it was so important to him that each person have a proper place to sit that he violated the prohibition around excessive work in order to clear a space for each person. As the leader, he saw and anticipated the needs of others, and he acted himself to ensure their inclusion. Okay, so he's acting. Instead of students saying, hey, we don't have room to sit, he was proactive and found a place for everybody to sit, even doing work on Shabbat that normally would be prohibited. Interestingly, the Talmud then seems to take issue with this. The Talmud asks if it is really the job of one person to clear the field for everyone, or perhaps each person should clear their own bundle, creating a space for themselves to sit, right? So they're getting into the nitty-gritty of the details of the story. Why couldn't Rabbi Yehuda HaNasi have asked each person to clear their own space? And doing that little bit of clearing might not have been work that would have been forbidden on Shabbat. Why couldn't he have done it that way? Is it the job of one person to look out for everyone else, or is each person responsible to advocate for their own needs and make sure they have a seat? Do I have to set up my own chair, or should someone else see that I need a seat and set one up for me? Right? So that's the question when doing anything as a community. Should people coming to a study session know that everything is going to be set up, or should they be expecting that they're going to have to do some work in order to be included? The Talmud answers in the affirmative. Yes, given it was Rabbi who cleared all the bundles, it therefore must be the role of one person to ensure the inclusion of others rather than the obligation of others to advocate for themselves, right? People shouldn't have to advocate for their needs. The leader should be able to see what the needs are and then to accommodate them. It's humiliating or embarrassing for someone to have to ask for their needs to be met. It's much more comfortable and it feels more inclusive if the leader is able to see what the needs are. But again, the Talmud is uncomfortable. The rabbis seem uncomfortable imagining Rabbi, a great leader of his generation, doing the manual labor of clearing a field just so students can sit. The Talmud asks again, but really, Rabbi really cleared the field? This time it answers no. He must have ordered someone else to clear the field. The leader himself wouldn't lower himself to do this. And then, even after we had already resolved the earlier question about who clears the bundles, the Talmud reverses his answer and says, really, it's each person's responsibility to clear their own bundle and make their own seat. So what is it then? Is it the responsibility of the leader to anticipate people's needs and be proactive? Or is it really, in the end, the obligation of everybody to advocate for themselves? No matter what their needs are, people shouldn't feel embarrassed. People should feel that they have the right to stand up for themselves. There is a tension embedded in this back and forth question in the Talmud regarding who is responsible for ensuring the needs of that the individuals are met. Is it the role of the community, and perhaps more specifically the leader, to anticipate the need and clear the field, or is it the role of each individual to advocate for their own needs and make sure they have a seat? If you want to sit, clear your own bundle. If you want to sit, clear your own bundle. Taken together, of course, it's both. The Torah teaches us the importance and necessity of individuals advocating for themselves and demanding what they need. Were those Israelites in our story about Pesach Sheni not to speak out about the unfairness, it seems that God wouldn't have created an accommodation that would allow for a more inclusive ritual for many generations to come. However, despite the ambivalence, there's also a strong thread in the story of Rabbi and the grain bundles, which suggests that not only is it not the role of individuals to secure their own seats, it's the role of the highest leader to create an environment in which everyone has a place to sit. And then the rest of it is based on some other point that she brought up. So there's a tension there about how laws are made and how accommodations are made. There's a tension between the omniscient leader, that is God, or to put it in human terms, the human leader should be always looking out for the needs of the community. But the leader can't foresee every kind of situation and can't imagine the possible ways in which not everybody is going to be able to participate, right? So this is a big deal. An example of this, back in the 1980s, when there was major discussion in the conservative movement about egalitarianism and whether women could become rabbis. I talked about it a little bit this past Shabbat and how ridiculous it might seem now to even talk about it. But back in the day, back in the 80s, there was a major discussion and caused a minor rift in the conservative movement itself over this. And an issue was that it was men talking about inclusivity, including women. So men who had to understand and imagine what it's like to be a woman and understand the needs of women, and then to be able to make the accommodation. So with millennia of tradition of male-oriented laws and rituals and traditions in Judaism, it's no wonder that it would be hard for a man to step out of that age-old tradition and be able to see beyond it and understand how somebody else who's not a man, namely a woman, might feel about all of that, right? So that's just one example of this. Also, the discussion 20 years ago about Jewish community being inclusive of people who are homosexual. Again, heterosexuals involved in the discussion of Jewish law on behalf of homosexuals. Able-bodied people speaking on behalf of people who are disabled to feel comfortable, right? People who see speaking on behalf of people who are blind, etc., etc. So it's very hard for someone in one category to be able to understand completely and therefore accommodate the needs of somebody in a different category. So what Rabbi Strasberg is suggesting, that the story of Pesach Sheni is about how that tension exists and how to solve the tension. That it's thanks to people who are from this other category, and then the category in our example is people who have been in contact with the dead. So that makes them other. It makes them impure as opposed to the community of people who are pure. So these impure people speaking up for themselves and saying, hey, we don't want to be excluded. We still want to be part of the bigger community to observe Pesach. How can we do it? As opposed to just assuming, well, I can't do it this year. Oh, well, I'll just go on and wait till next year. So it requires, when we face issues like this, it requires patience and open-mindedness on the part of the affected and the part of the mainline normative community to be open to each other and to ensure that opportunities are there for as full inclusion as possible. So any thoughts or comments about this?
I have a comment, but it's not directly related to that. And that
Okay,
is
go ahead.
when the assumption, I guess, is that people handling corpses, that they had to take care of their own families. But when did that process become formalized?
Oh, well, like when do they become like funeral homes and things like
And
that?
then and also the rituals involved.
Right. So, well, I think the rituals were there from the time of the rabbis in terms of what the washing of the body and the dressing of the body in shrouds. So that would have been, and making the casket too, or wrapping the body, digging the grave. All of that would have been done by the family members themselves on behalf of the deceased member of their family. I think when it was over the course of time and depended, I think, upon how large the Jewish community or individual communities were, that there would have been a Chevra Kadisha formed to take care of all of the dead in that particular community, so that it wouldn't fall on each family to do it for themselves, that there was a Chevra Kadisha. So I would imagine that happened in the Middle Ages, but I don't know absolutely for sure, and I don't know how it developed in the Ashkenazi world versus how it developed in the Sephardi world. But it's rare now, in fact, probably unheard of, that family members do the work themselves now. In other words, it's always, at least in America and Canada, it's always done by a Chevra Kadisha, and in Israel, it's done by a Chevra Kadisha too. Whether it's a formal Jewish funeral home or a Chevra Kadisha working in a non-Jewish funeral home, that's how it works. So when I lived in Lowell, Massachusetts, there was Lowell itself did not have a Jewish funeral home, but there was a large Greek Orthodox Christian community, and there was a funeral home of that community that handled Jewish funerals. And so they had the Chevra Kadisha of Lowell come into that Greek Orthodox funeral home and use the facility to take care of the Jewish dead of Lowell. So that's how it would work. In communities that didn't have a Jewish funeral home, there would be a Chevra Kadisha organized by the community to take care of the needs of the Jewish community. So that is a process that developed, like I said, from the Middle Ages down to today.
But it's not written anywhere. It just
I don't, I'm sure it is written somewhere. I'm just not up on where it's written. If you were Google, I'm sure there's a Wikipedia article that you can get you started on Chevra Kadisha. So if you Google Chevra Kadisha and probably spell it with an H, not a CH, Hevra Kadisha. If you Google it, there'll be, or just say history of Chevra Kadisha, Google that, then articles will come up and there'll be more accurate information, specific information than what I'm giving you.
but I would expect a rabbi somewhere had developed the process of what people are supposed to do. No?
Yeah, it's in the Talmud.
Okay,
It's in
that's
the
what I
Talmud.
was asking. Yeah.
Yeah. So I don't know exactly where in the Talmud it is, but yes, it's definitely in the Talmud about the how to wash the body and all of that
Okay.
preparation. Absolutely. Yeah. So, okay. So, like I said, today's our last Torah study until after Labor Day. Wish everybody a good rest of the day and happy Memorial Day weekend. And have a safe and healthy summer. Bye-bye.
Yashar Koach.